Welcome back to the desk here at the 2024 Mackinac Policy Conference. In a few minutes, we are going to go to the keynote address from Governor Gretchen Whitmer. But first, I am super pleased to welcome Celeste Watkins-Hayes, Dean of the Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. Welcome. This is also your first Mackinac Policy Conference.
It is. Thank you for having me on the show. So excited to be here at the conference.
So just your first thoughts for folks who are watching who have never been at the conference. How's it going? Like, give us the vibe.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
There are a ton of people here, all here for the state of Michigan, and thinking collectively about how do we improve, develop, grow the state, whether we're talking about economic development, whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about healthcare, the tech sector. The idea that in these very divisive and complicated times, you have all of these people from all walks of life here to talk about the future of our state and to cheerlead for our state and to have great conversations across about our state is really inspiring.
Well, so let's dig in a little bit about those divisive times.
Yeah.
Right. You just finished your first year as permanent dean.
Yes.
Should know. And it has been a year.
It has.
And it's going to continue to be a year because, of course, we've got a huge election coming up for president and, of course, down ballot. I'm curious where you sit at the Ford School, where you're trying to dig in to policy, just how you're thinking about the year that's been and the year that's to come.
Right. So we really think about policy conversations as a three-legged stool. It's about policy analysis, policy communication, and policy leadership. So policy analysis is how do we use evidence and data? We all have stories. Stories are important, but when you aggregate that and try to figure out what are the trends, what works, what doesn't, what's a good use of financial resource, what's not, what's a great use of people and human capital, what's not, we really think about, let's use the evidence to make our decisions. So policy analysis, we teach our students how to do that, how to call balls and strikes in terms of looking at the numbers, looking at the stories, and being able to come to some conclusions about what our next steps should be. The second piece of it is about policy communication. How do we, through our written and oral communication, tell each other stories, communicate our values, share our priorities in ways that are constructive? And we at the Ford School are spending a lot of time thinking about that second piece because of the divisiveness that we see in our politics. We're seeing policy communication devolve into a contest of who can scream the loudest, who can dunk on somebody on social media, who can be the loudest and the meanest. And we really are trying to encourage our students to think of a better way to connect and to have conversations across policy differences, across ideological differences. So it's a big topic that we're thinking about at the Ford School. And then the third piece of what we do, policy leadership. Once you know what the evidence is telling you, once you know how to communicate what you want to do, how do you lead? And how do you lead across difference? How do you bring people along? How do you find commonality with someone that you might not agree with? And how do you think about a shared set of goals to advance in a whole host of areas, whether we're talking about health, education, workforce, etc. So at the Ford School, we basically live the Mackinac Policy Conference day to day. And we're thinking a lot about this upcoming election and how we're going to use those three-legged stool approach of analysis, communication, and leadership to really model the way for how we think about elections, how we think about voter engagement, how we think about the issues.
Yeah. And I find that fascinating because I'm sure you saw the polling that came out from the chamber earlier this week that showed a disconnect between sort of what we know as evidence and reality versus what people may be feeling, which is fair. Everyone can have their feelings, but it feels like it's not sort of driven by actual facts and data.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not one magic solution, but if you were to offer some advice about what we can all do as society to help fix that and to help us get back into just one set of facts, what do you say?
Well, I think it's people are driven by different things, and we've got to have a multi-pronged approach. For some people, they want to see the numbers, point me to the numbers. For others, they want to hear the stories. And some people really resonate with the stories because it reminds them of their own experience. So we might be able to lean into someone's experience and honor that, but then have a conversation of, well, let me tell you, though, how your experience really does or does not align with the majority of people in the state, the majority of Americans? Why do you think your experience is different? What's distinct? What can we learn from it? How can we learn from each other so that people don't feel chastised about their experiences, their points of view, their ideas? They don't feel yelled at, they don't feel talked down to, but they feel brought into a conversation where first they are heard, and secondly, what their experiences are put into a larger context that help all of us understand the path forward a little bit better.
So 2024,
Yes.
it is an election year.
Yeah.
50 years ago, a president was sworn in.
Yeah.
Your school bears Gerald Ford's name.
Sure does. Yes.
Talked about you're wearing the pin.
Yes.
So first tell me a little bit about sort of what this means for the next year for the Ford School celebrating the 50 years. But then I'm also curious about sort of some of the takeaways.
Right. So we're acknowledging and commemorating the 50th anniversary of the presidency of Gerald R. Ford. Yeah. And the first thing that we want to do is just to highlight his story. Yeah. It's so interesting how many people don't necessarily know that Gerald Ford, although he was born out of state, grew up in Grand Rapids. Yeah. The fact that he went to the University of Michigan. A lot of people know that he did play football for the University of Michigan, but they don't necessarily connect as he was a student, and he was a struggling student financially.
Yes.
He really had to work hard and piece things together to be able to pay for his education. Yeah. And then we're talking about the way in which he then went on to be this leader who was invested in bipartisanship, was very driven by values of fairness, fiscal responsibility, bringing people along, decency. Yeah. And those were such hallmarks of his leadership that we really want to call those forth and really inspire our students and the rest of the Ford School community to think about how do we think about those values today.
So many lessons to take away, and such an intriguing time, 50 years in this election years.
So check us out at the Ford School. We're going to be doing events starting in the fall that will commemorate, and continue to check out all the great things happening at the Ford School of Public Policy.
Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.